Well, welcome back, everybody, and welcome new folks to the second in our five-part podcasting workshop series. Today, we're going to be focusing on all the intricacies of recording. Before I forget, I'm going to put a bunch of links into the chat, resources for this workshop, our YouTube channel in case you need to go back and review anything or you're going to miss an upcoming workshop, as well as a feedback form for the end of the session and more info. And yes, as soon as I'm done processing the video, I'll put it up on that YouTube channel and probably won't email folks out about it till the end of the workshop series at the end of the month. I want to introduce and welcome back Patrick Flanagan, who is the DH Center Programs and Operations Specialist. He is the podcast and recording expert. He is a musician. Everything I learned about working with audio, I learned from him. And while he doesn't actually work on Fridays, he's graciously offered to help out with these workshops. So he'll be answering questions in chat and help chiming in whenever necessary to help me. And before I forget, I'm Pam Lach. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Digital Humanities Librarian here at San Diego State. So with that, we're going to dive into the wonderful world of recording. If I could get my slides to advance. There we go. And as we do here at San Diego State, I want to begin with our land acknowledgement. For millennia, the Kumeyaay people have been a part of this land. This land has nourished, healed, protected, and embraced them for many generations in a relationship of balance and harmony. As members of the San Diego State community, we acknowledge this legacy. We promote this balance and harmony. We find inspiration from this land, the land of the Kumeyaay. I also want to acknowledge that this workshop wouldn't be possible without some of the tools that we're using, particularly Zoom, which is headquartered on the traditional lands of the Ohlone and Tamiyan people in what we now call San Jose, California. And that the resources that we produce, we've been using in Google Drive, which is based on, and Google is based on the traditional lands of the Tamiyan people, the Ohlone, the Ramaytush, and the Mwekma peoples in what we now call Mountain View, California. And these technologies, which allow us to connect across vast distances, are not without invisible costs, both in terms of human labor and environmental impact. And I'll also acknowledge that a land acknowledgement is a starting place and not a substitute for righting the injustices of the past and present. Okay, so this is the second of our five-part workshop series. Last week, we explored sort of an introduction to podcasting and covered a range of things, including types of podcasts, planning a podcast, file management, and copyright, and I think scholarly podcasting as well. Today, we're going to start to get a bit more technical with the recording aspects of podcasting. And then next week, we'll go into the intricacies of editing. As a reminder, all of these resources live in that public Google Drive folder. There's slides, there's quick tip sheets, training videos, and sample audio. So as we start working with audio, if you're not comfortable making your own audio, but you want to practice your skills, you can always download our audio, all of which is open source, public domain audio to play with that. There's also a podcasting resources overview document, which links out to all of these things. And if you're at an institution that is looking to create a podcasting studio or some sort of recording studio, you can check out our spec sheet that Patrick and I have worked on over the last several years. And one quick plug, if you like what you see in this workshop series and you have institutional support, either for yourself or for graduate students, you can check out our week-long immersive hands-on podcast institute run in partnership with the National Humanities Center. Several of our institute alum have joined us for this workshop series as a little refresher. This is a much more surface level approach than what we are able to do in a week-long immersive institute. Our graduate student institute is going to be this January, and registration is now live. You can follow out that link for that. And then in June, we'll host one for faculty, librarians, academic staff, and independent scholars. Last year, the National Humanities Center offered several scholarships for independent scholars or folks without institutional support, and I hope that they will do so as well this summer. So even if you don't have institutional support to participate, keep an eye out for that because there likely will be scholarships in the future as well. Okay, what we're going to be doing today, we are going to talk about what you need to record and the conditions for recording. And then we're actually going to dive into recording. I'm going to demo some recording, solo recording. I'm not going to demo recording with multiple people. We have a tip sheet for different kinds of recording options, depending on what it is you're trying to do and what kind of recording environment you have. And we're going to cover a range of options today. That tip sheet is just a quick referral, quick glance, if you just want a quick glance at things. Excuse me one moment. Okay, so what do you need to record? There's a couple key things you need for recording. The first is some sort of microphone. And typically, you don't want to use whatever's built into your laptop. Some sort of external mic is generally going to be better. Some people use gaming headsets or earbuds. In the early days of the pandemic, I used, back when we were first sent home and my podcast microphone was still at work, I used these. The one problem with wired headphones was, as a fidgeter, my microphone would brush against my clothing and it would produce some noise there. Or you can invest in some sort of microphone. We use as sort of the entry-level Blue Yeti. It's a fairly affordable entry-level microphone. It ranges from 100 to 150, depending on the type. I am tempted to show you mine, but it's going to produce a lot of noise if I do that in the Zoom. And we are actually just upgrading to more professional mics, the Shure SM7B, which is a much more high-end and sophisticated mic. Patrick's done a bunch of research on microphones, and so if you're curious about the range, you can always reach out to him. His email is on the last slide of this slide deck. You also need some sort of place to record, ideally a place that's quiet and has sound dampening or soundproofing. And you can do this without an actual recording studio. Here in the DH Center in the library at San Diego State, we have 3 podcasting studios that are available to self-book Monday through Friday, 10 to 4. We have 2 single-use studios, which just have a Yeti. That's a picture of the Yeti right there in the corner. You bring your own laptop and USB adapter to USB microphone. And then we've just launched a really fancy high-end recording studio, our multi-track studio, with the really fancy microphones. And so if you're here and you have an SDSU email, you can book time and we'll get you set up to work in there. If you're also here at San Diego State and you can't record on site, you can also check out a microphone at the circulation desk. Although the range and quality of the microphones will vary and not all of them are great. And it's really important that you make sure you know how to use the microphone. We once had a student check out a microphone, go and do a recording, and she wasn't using the microphone properly and she wasn't in a good recording environment and didn't get a very good sound capture of the interview she was doing. And so there's just going to be a range of microphones there, and some have seen a lot of use. Now, if you can't get to a recording studio, you can very easily create a recording environment wherever you are that's a little bit more conducive. We got really creative during those first couple of years of the pandemic when we were all at home. So what you need is some sort of enclosed space. So you don't want to be in a cavernous room with really tall ceilings and a lot of bare walls, because that's going to produce a lot of echo and reverb. You want a smaller space with stuff on the walls. Where I teach the Institute at home, I have a really large quilt on the wall, and it really is good for sound dampening. I also have a carpet to absorb sound a little bit. A lot of folks during the pandemic ended up recording in their closets. And if you have a walk-in closet, it's an ideal space for recording because the clothing that you have hanging there produces that natural sound dampening. So you get much better sound and you're a little bit more isolated from the noise of your street or your yard or whatever kind of environment you're in. We have a colleague here at San Diego State who recorded her podcast in her car. She lives on a fairly quiet street, but she still brought blankets and pillows into her car to dampen the sound a little bit. Or you can get really, if you get really desperate, if you're in in your home office or something, or just at your kitchen table, you can do a lot of journalists do when they're on the road. And I have a little prop here. You can take a blanket and you can drape it. Let's see if I can do this. Between like the table and the chair, and then sit underneath your blanket, and it will dampen your sound a little bit that way. It's my understanding that NPR journalists do this in hotels when they're recording in the field and can't get to a studio. So you can do a lot with just a little blanket or something. If you can't control your sound environment, the other thing you can do is in a recording session, record some of the ambient noise in your space and try to strip that out in post-production. A couple things to help you do that. If there's a ceiling fan, you might want to turn that off during recording as long as it's not too hot in your space. If you have an air conditioning, like a window unit or something, you might want to turn that off as well. Try to get rid of as much ambient noise as possible. And then, of course, it'll be hard to control for irregular sounds, like suddenly, this always happens, you're recording and your mail carrier arrives and your dog just happens to start barking really loudly right next to you. That's something we can't control for. And if that happens, what you'd really want to do is just pause and then re-record that section, because you'll have a hard time editing that out. And we'll cover that in a little bit later in this session. Okay, in addition to a microphone and some sort of space to record in, you need some sort of software to record too. I should also add that some people, particularly for students doing small assignments, you can also just record on your phone. Let me go back one slide. Oops, there we go. You won't get necessarily the best audio quality on your phone, but it does have a microphone, and you can record to your voice memo app. I don't know what the equivalent is on an Android phone, but that's what it is on an iPhone. And you can make it work with whatever you've got. So even if you don't have a fancy microphone, whatever you've got, you can make it work. And if you control for those the environment a little bit, you can improve your sound quality even more. And the better sound quality you have, the less you have to do in post-production. There'll still be plenty of editing to do, though. And then you need some software. So in our work here, we teach Audacity. We like Audacity because it's free. And it works Mac and PCs. There is a Linux version. I'm told it's fairly hard to install unless you're really good at Linux. And I'm not sure if it's been updated for the latest version of Audacity. It claims to have a Chromebook version, but we've not had any luck with that. We are also an Adobe Creative Cloud campus. So everyone here at SDSU has a free access to the Creative Cloud. And you can use Adobe Audition. It's a steeper learning curve with Audition, so we typically emphasize Audacity to get folks started. And Audition, it's a more complex tool, it's more sophisticated, and files tend to be bigger, so it requires more computing power, or at least more storage on your computer. I'm always hesitant to teach Audition to our students. In part, I find Audition a little intimidating, but also when they graduate, they lose their free access to Adobe, and not everyone can afford the Creative Cloud. And so if you can edit in Audacity, you can always adapt to Audition if you get access to it down the road, and vice versa. So we emphasize the free and slightly easier to use tool. If you have worked with audio for a long time and you're comfortable in GarageBand, you can certainly use that. To my knowledge, Windows does not have a built-in audio tool, but you can download various ones out there, or apps that are out there. Chromebook is the one tricky thing. We've seen students here struggle to record with Chromebook because you can't really install. It's really hard. I don't think you can really install a lot of things on Chromebooks, and there's not a lot of storage. So when students come in here with a Chromebook, we typically will lend them a laptop. But there are browser-based tools for recording. Anchor.fm used to be the go-to thing for doing this. Spotify has bought Anchor, and so they still claim that it's free to use to record, but I don't know if it will always be free. And a lot of folks use Twisted Wave. These are browser-based tools for recording and editing. Some are free, some are not. We'll also talk about options for when you're recording with others and you're not together in a room, because that's a different set of software that you might need to use. I'm going to pause there and see if there are any questions before I keep going. And you can either put your questions in chat, or you can always unmute yourself, but keep in mind that your video and or avatar will show up in the recording afterwards. Okay,
do you have any recommendations for tracking audio levels during recordings?
Yes, we're going to talk. Yeah, we're going to talk about that when we start going into the software.
Brilliant, thank you.
Yeah, there's different options for how to do that for sure, depending on your recording setup. But thank you. Okay, I'm going to keep going. Normally, when we're doing our podcast institute, so in our institute, we give everybody a Yeti. And so we spend time training folks in how to use the Yeti. Y'all are using different things. Some of you have Yetis, some of you might be using other kinds of mics. And so I'm going to not go into details with Yeti other than to show you the kinds of things you need to think about. And we will talk about sound checks in just a few minutes. So every mic is a little bit different. And so the key here is to remember, is to understand what kind of mic you're using and how it functions. So for us in the Yeti is really interesting because it has a lot of features on the Yeti itself. So it's a 4-pattern microphone. I'll explain what that means in just a moment. And it has controls built onto the microphone. And this is a photo of the front of the Yeti. It's put on a very firm stand to keep you from knocking it over. You can plug headphones directly into the Yeti to get to hear how what the Yeti is picking up. I get really distracted hearing myself when I'm recording, so I don't like to do that, but it's good for getting your sound levels. And then you can always turn the volume down for your headphones so it's not distracting. You'll hear everything. And Patrick loves doing that. And whenever we're recording, he knows that I'll either take my headphones off or lower my the volume on the headphones as much as I can, because I can't stand it. It's just too much for me. And again, it really depends. But using the headphones at least helps you make sure you're getting good sound capture. On the back, we've got a couple different features. We've got the 4 patterns. So depending on if it's you speaking, you'd set it to the cardioid, which looks like an upside down heart. But if you're speaking with other people into one Yeti, you'd want to use either bidirectional or omni. And then the gain knob allows you to adjust the levels of sound capture. And typically we're talking about like sort of the range of high to low. So from soft to quiet, loud. And so the goal is to get your sound levels really good so you don't have to amplify or de-amplify in post-production. We like to start with the gain at the 12 o'clock position straight up, and then we adjust from there. But it's not just the gain that matters, it's your position to the mic. So I'm going to skip that for now. So essentially, it's really important that you know where to speak into your mic. So with a Yeti, the Yeti sits straight up and we speak into the front or into the back, depending on the settings. The Shure mic that we're using sits at an angle and we speak into the end. We've seen people who've accidentally tilted their Yeti and tried to speak into the end and not get good sound capture. Similarly, if you're using the Shure and you're trying to speak into the side, you're not going to get good sound capture. So you need to know what kind of mic you're using and where to speak and how to position it. These professional mics are incredibly sensitive. They pick up everything. I am a fidgeter. So when I'm recording, I have to take off jangly jewelry. I have to often I have to sit on my hands because I'm so it can pick up everything. You probably can't hear this over Zoom because Zoom dampens this. but it just picks up everything. So if, for instance, you want to read from a script on your keyboard, you need to be careful about the clicking of the keys. You want to make sure that you have muted your email apps and your Slack notifications, because all of that will come through. We were doing a recording a couple weeks ago where the host forgot to mute his email application, and an email came through right in the middle of recording, and we all heard the ding, and it got picked up on the audio, on the recording, of course. And again, the position of the mic and your position is really critical. So it's important that you understand what kind of mic you're using. Generally speaking, we want to be maybe 6 to 12 inches away from the mic. I usually start about 6 inches away and then adjust. And then, you want to be sitting in a posture that's good for your sound. Some people prefer to stand when they're recording to get a little bit more energy, a little bit different kind of sound. The closer you go to your mic, your voice will get deeper. Patrick is better at demoing this than I am, but as you move closer, your voice will change. So in getting good sound capture, it's a combo of your position relative to the mic, as well as your sound levels and how you adjust that. Yes, definitely switch your phones to airplane mode or at least turn off or silence your phone, or put it in another room or something like that. If your script is on your phone, then airplane mode might be a good idea. You can also put on the do not disturb so that you don't get any notifications. So there's any number of ways that you can do that, but do think about your phone and the way that might come through on the microphone. And just be prepared for that. Great question. So no matter what kind of mic you're using, you want to make sure you know how to use it. You know how to configure it in relationship to your audio software, and that's what we're going to do next, and that your sound levels are good so you get good capture. You also want to make sure, and I'll talk more about this throughout the rest of the hour, is that you know how to do a recording from start to finish. That is, how to start the recording, how to save the recording, and where you're saving it to, and you need to make sure you have enough storage on your computer. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit. There we go. Okay, so let's dive into this. I'm going to just do a little descriptive explanation, and then I'm going to switch over to live demo, which is the fun part. Okay, so no matter how seasoned a recorder, an audio person you are, no matter how many podcasts you have recorded, you want to do a test every time. Once you get your sound levels good to go, you want to make sure you know what you're doing and that everything is working, because even if it's the exact same setup you've used a gazillion times, some little gremlin's going to get in there and change something. And if you're not careful, you could lose something. So you need to make sure everything's configured correctly, that your recording software is actually recording your mic. We've had people in our institute who've plugged their mics in and recorded in their audio software, but didn't configure their software to record from the mic. And so they thought they were speaking into their professional mic, but they were actually using the built-in laptop mic. And so you need to always check that. Always do that sound check with the sound levels. And then know where you're saving your files. Oftentimes, and I'm guilty of this when I'm doing a quick demo, I sometimes am not paying attention, and Audacity at least likes to save things in the last folder you were in, maybe not the folder you want it to be in. And sometimes it can be a little stressful trying to find the thing you've just done. I would also recommend that you do a full playback in the same recording session to make sure all systems are go. So do a quick, maybe a minute recording, finish it, save it, close out, open it up again, make sure it's all working, and don't leave anything to chance, especially if you're new to recording. But I think even seasoned folks do this. And Patrick does this all the time. He's always testing things, making sure all systems are go before we go live with the recording. You also want to give yourself time to get comfortable. You need time to warm up. I have taught nearly 500 people how to podcast over the years. But a few weeks ago, I was actually co-hosting a podcast for the first time. And we started and I froze. And I was not expecting to do that. I thought I was ready. We'd spent about 20 minutes doing sound checks and getting comfortable. But the minute we hit record, I froze. So give yourself and your guests time to warm up and get comfortable while recording. And I recommend that you just keep the recording going until you're ready to start. And when you are ready to start, just pause. And then you can start, and you can always trim out that preliminary stuff later. You also might get some good tape as people are starting to warm up. Checklist with a tech layout and levels is a great idea. I think Patrick is actually working on a checklist. I should develop a checklist for our folks to use so that they can just check through everything before each recording session. That is a great idea. Thanks so much, Steve. Okay, one last thing to keep in mind, and this is a quirk of Mac, and it may or may not be an issue with Windows. Macs are weird about external things, and particularly the Yeti and Audacity. So make sure that you plug your Yeti or whatever mic you're using into your computer before you launch your software. And make sure that you don't unplug the microphone while running the software, because you can crash things. If you're a Mac user running an older version of Audacity and an older operating system, reach out to me. You're going to have some problems. We've experienced some problems, particularly with older operating systems, and hopefully by now most people are not using Catalina anymore. But if you are, you might have some issues recording. There are workarounds, and just send me an email if you're having trouble with that. If you get some sort of error about opening your recording device, it means that you accidentally unplugged your mic while running your Audacity or your Audition. There might be a similar error message in Audition, but this is the Audacity message. It's no big deal. You just have to exit out, plug in your microphone, and start over. So you just want to make sure once you get everything set up that you just don't touch anything. And I would also add, for those of you who are Mac users who will be using an external mic, our mics are USB. And I would recommend that you use the kind of adapter where you plug in the USB to USB-C, but also can power the adapter. You're going to get better, have a better experience if you have more power running through that adapter, rather than just using the USB to USB-C standalone adapter. So if you have something where you can plug your power adapter into the USB adapter, that's going to be the best bet. Yeah, and as Patrick reminds us, the first step to troubleshooting is turning everything off and then turning it on again. Something magical happens when we do that. And that's always our first step. Okay, so we are going to move into recording on your own. I'm just going to show you a few things on the slides and then move into Audacity. Okay, so I'll give you a little bit of an introduction to Audacity today, but we'll actually do more of the intro to Audacity next week. But again, we use Audacity as our starting point for training folks, and it's quite powerful. And actually, it's changed a lot since we first started running this workshop series a couple of years, and first started running the Institute a couple of years ago. You're going to see me do this live, but again, and it never hurts to reinforce this, you always want to make sure your input and output devices are set correctly. Your input, that's your microphone, and your output is your speaker. You want to make sure you've got good sound capture, that you're sitting in a comfortable position and in a good position to get good sound with your microphone. You want to start that recording with some silence in case you need to control for the ambient noise in your space. And you can always use pause or mute if you're going to cough or hit or sneeze or something, but you can also edit that out later. If you're using Audacity for the first time, you might need to grant it access to whatever microphone you're using, and that's no big deal to do either. And this is what we're going to be doing in our setup. I'm going to walk us through this in real time, so I'm going to skip over this. Okay. And I'll go over this in real time as well, but when you're done recording, there are two actions you can do. And if you're new to recording, I highly recommend you do both. Patrick, as the very seasoned audio person, tends to do it a little bit differently. as a still relatively, I mean, I'm not new to this, but I don't trust myself. I go through all the steps. So the first thing you want to do is create and save what's called a project in Audacity, or a project workspace. This is a space where you're going to do all of your editing, bring in all of your different audio to mix it and get your sound levels and do your fade-ins and your transitions and have background music and all that good stuff. That's the place where you're going to do all the work. I also recommend that when you're done recording, that you export that recording as a standalone audio file. It's a backup in case while editing, something goes awry and you need to go back to your original file. And so just to explain this a little bit more, we have two types of files that we're talking about when we talk about audio in this context. The first set are audio files. Think of WAV files, which are large files, and MP3, which is the typical format we use for streaming audio. MP3 is interoperable, which means that I haven't met an audio player that can't open an MP3. MP3s are compressed, so they're ideal for sitting out on the web and getting pushed out through the RSS feed, whereas WAV are much larger files. They're often more preservation copies. A podcast is a mix of many different kinds of audio files. You might have multiple speakers. You might have music and sound effects. All of those would be individual WAV or MP3 files that then come into your project workspace. And that is another set of file. In Audacity, that is an AUP3. In Audition, it's something different. That is a file that can only open in Audacity and only in Audacity 3.0. It's not backwards compatible with older editions of versions of Audacity. That's the space where you bring in all those audio files and edit them and mix them. So when we talk about when you're done with a recording, you'll save that AUP3 and export that MP3 or WAV file. And so you'll have two versions of what you've just recorded, just in case. If you're a really seasoned recorder and editor, you can do just saving the project workspace and keep recording there. But if you're new to it, I highly recommend you do both things. Again, Patrick typically just does the save, but he's been working in Audacity for decades, and he's really good at it. I've been working at it for less than a decade and still, need to make sure I'm doing everything, making sure I don't always trust that I'm going to not make a mistake. Okay, I'm going to now move into Audacity. And while I'm launching that, I'll see if there are any questions. Okay, can folks see my Audacity window? Awesome, thank you. Okay, so this is the latest version of Audacity. Keep in mind that Audacity has been releasing updates at a more regular pace than it used to. And so we joke that before every institute, there's always a new version of Audacity that we have to quickly learn the new features of. As long as you're using something in the 3.0 range, you're good to go. All of these toolbars are interchangeable. You can turn toolbars on and off, and you can move them around. We're not going to talk about all of the toolbars today, just some of them. And in particular, we're going to talk about audio setup. So I need to make sure that everything is configured correctly. And there's a drop-down menu that allows me to do that. I can also, under View, turn on my device toolbar to get a quick look at what I'm doing. So I'm going to start by configuring my recording device. That's my microphone. I'm using a Yeti today. You'll see it now says Yeti. I'm going to record in stereo. Stereo is ideal because most people listen to podcasts with headphones in, and stereo means that your voice will come through on the left side and the right side. Mono means it's either one or the other. You can always play with that in post-production. So Patrick's been playing lately with having one speaker be sort of in both ears and then other speakers being slightly to the left or slightly to the right. But for sound capture purposes, we do everything in stereo if we can. Not all microphones will allow you to record in in stereo. You can always convert from mono to stereo in post-production. And then I'm going to change my speakers or my playback device. This is where it gets a little tricky. If you have a headphone plugged into your Yeti microphone, you would use the Yeti as your speaker. I don't have any headphones plugged in, so I would normally use the MacBook Pro speakers. But because I'm in Zoom today and I'm on a Mac, I'm going to need to use my Zoom audio device. This is only something I do in Zoom. I'll also note this host. For Macs, there's no option to change this. I know for PC there is, and different things mean different things. I'm not a PC user. If you have questions about Audacity for Windows, you can direct those to Patrick, because I haven't used a Windows machine in a really long time. Okay, now I've got everything configured, and now I'm going to start checking my sound levels. I'm going to use my recording and playback levels as a visual cue for me. So I'm going to hit the red recording button. And now what you're going to see is the visual representation of my audio, my voice. This is my waveform. And you're going to see up here at the top my recording level. And there's various cues here to help me know how good the sound capture is. Ideally, we want to stay in that green zone. If I get too loud or if I get too close to my microphone, you'll see yellow, which is okay, but then you'll also see red. And the red is really bad because that's going to produce like a crackle and a distortion that I won't be able to edit out. So let's take a quick listen. And now what you're going to see, can you hear that? Is the visual representation of my audio, my voice. This is my waveform. And you're going to see up here at the top my recording level. And there's various cues here to help me know how good the sound capture is. Ideally, we want to stay in that green zone. If I get too loud or if I get too close to my microphone, you'll see yellow, which is okay, but then you'll also see red. And the red is really... So did folks hear that crackle right here as I got started to distort? Yellow, which is okay, but then you'll also see red. And the red is really bad because that's going to produce like a crackle. There's distortion here. And I have done this enough times to know visually what that looks like. It looks like the waveform peaks. It's hitting the very top and the very bottom. Sorry, I don't know the very technical terms for this, and I tend to make up my own terms when I'm doing this. But essentially, I can de-amplify that in post-production, but that crackle I can't get rid of. So we want to use these visual cues to help us get a good sound level. So what I'll do next is I'll keep recording and now start to adjust. So the first thing I'll adjust is, I want to figure out how far away I want to be from the microphone and then adjust the microphone accordingly. In this case, I'm going to adjust it on the microphone. Depending on your setup, if you have a soundboard, you would adjust it in the soundboard. And so it's a combination of your posture, your proximity to the mic, and the actual recording levels. So let's go back to recording. And now what I'm going to do is turn up my gain. My gain is now up at like 2 o'clock. And I'm actually speaking a little more quietly, a little bit more of a speaking voice. I tend to project a little too much when I'm recording. And it's looking pretty good. Again, if I get too close, it's going to be a little distorted. Let's hear the difference there. And now what I'm going to do is turn up my gain. My gain is now up at like 2 o'clock. And I'm actually speaking a little more quietly, a little bit more of a speaking voice. I tend to project a little too much when I'm recording. And it's looking pretty good. Again, if I get too close, it's going to be a little distorted. And in this case, I didn't actually distort as I got closer to the microphone. Okay, so I'm feeling pretty good about my sound levels. I'm going to go ahead and start an actual recording. This is all junk. I don't need it. I'm just going to X out here and just close this, and it's gone. And now I'm back to an empty space with no audio or anything. As soon as I start recording, you'll see the stereo audio track begin to pick up sound. And again, I'm going to wait a few seconds to get a little bit of the ambient noise in case I need to strip anything out in post-production. Principles of Emergent Strategy by Adrienne Marie Brown. Let me do that over. Principles of Emergent Strategy by Adrienne Marie Brown. Small is good, small is all. The large is a reflection of the small. Change is, Change is constant, be like water. Okay, I did that intentionally. I want to show what happens if you freeze or if you have to clear your throat or if you mess up or flub in any way. The best thing to do is just pause and start over. As you become more familiar with audio files, you'll start to be able to see where you mess up. Let me demo this a little bit better and then show you what I mean. I'm talking now and oh shoot, I forgot to mute myself. Okay. What you'll notice as I zoom out a little bit is the pattern of the waveform where I messed up is way different from here where I'm speaking kind of normally. That helps me as a more seasoned editor identify visually where I need to edit. And so I can just keep that going and then edit it out later. I can also do a feature that's new to Audacity called punch and record. I can go back a ways and start the recording, start playback, and then it's going to let me record over. So if I want to start recording here where I started to mess up, I could go under edit. Nope. I can't remember. Hang on one second. There we go. Sorry, transport. I always forget which menu. And Kevin, I'll answer your question in just a moment. Under recording, I can do punch and roll record. It's going to start with a little bit of playback so I know where I left off. Shoot. No, that's not where I want to be. Let's do it here. Small is good, small is all. The large is a reflection of the small. Change is constant, be like water. There is always enough time for the right work. There's a conversation in the room that only these people at this moment can have. Find it. And so what I did was I got rid of all that coughing and just picked up where I was recording. And let me just quickly play that back, and then Kevin, I'll answer your question. Small is good, small is all. The large is a reflection of the small. Change is constant, be like water. There is always enough time for the right work. There's a conversation in the room that only these people at this moment can have. Find it. Okay, Kevin, go ahead and ask your question.
Well, it wasn't so much a question. It was a thing that I do that might be helpful in these sort of situations. I use a dog training clicker, and I actually have it in my hand. You can hear it. So when I flub up a line, I click that, and then I can see the click on the waveform there. It makes it really easy to edit stuff.
Yeah, that's a lovely approach. And what's nice about that is the clicker is a constant sound, right? So it's going to look the same in the waveform and be a nice visual cue. And there's other things you can do too in Audacity and Audition. You can add labels and you can sort of annotate your audio file so you can find those places at a later time as well. The key is to pause and start over and give yourself enough of a pause to make editing easier. And if you don't pause enough, you could end up when you're editing, clipping your words a little bit. So whatever feels right for you. So you can just say, let me start over and pause, or you can, if you get more comfortable, you can do the punch and record. That's something that you want to practice and make sure you know how it works. If you wanted to record over this section here, if you do the punch and record, it's not just going to do this section, it's going to do everything that comes after that. So you have to be a little careful with that one. Okay, I'm just checking the chat right now. Okay, let's say that this is the file that this is the recording session and I'm happy with it. I know there are mistakes in it. I know there are errors. I'll deal with that in post-production. I'm going to do those two actions that I talked about, the save and the export, because I want y'all to see the difference between them. So I'm going to start by going under File, and I'm going to save that project. Save in the File menu is reserved for these project workspaces. And it will remind me this. I like to keep all my little warning pop-ups, but you can disable that if you want. And it's going to ask me, where do you want to save it? I happen to know I'm in the right place, but I will double check that. Yep, that's good. All workshop. Okay, so it's my first recording session, and I'm going to save that. And if I open up my file manager, what you're seeing here is this is the file. 2023 Fall Workshop Recording Sesh 01 AUP3. This is a temporary file that disappears when I close the AUP3. This is a place where I can do all my editing, and it saves all those edits. But again, because I'm not comfortable with my editing skills, I'm also going to export this. Oops, make sure I'm in Audacity when I do this. I'm going to go to File, Export. You can pick an MP3, a WAV, whatever you want. I'm going to just do an MP3 to not clunk up the storage on my computer. I need to make sure, here's where I screw up with the export, that I'm in the place where I want to be. So here and here. I'm not going to give it a different file name because it's got a different file extension. And I'll go ahead and save it. Now it's asking me to add metadata. This is really important for the final podcast mixdown. We need metadata for the RSS feed. But because I'm just saving a snippet that's going to be part of a larger podcast, I'm going to skip this for now, and I'll show you how to do this when it's time for the final mixdown. Okay, so now what we've got is this AUP3 file here and the MP3. Just to make this a little clearer, I'm going to quit Audacity. If I go to open up the MP3, it's going to open in the default media player or audio player on my computer, which happens to be Apple Music, rather. I can change that if I want. And this is it. Principles of Emergent Strategy. If I click the AUP3, that's the Audacity file. That is where I'll do all of my editing. So again, Patrick tends, and there it is, that's it. And you can see everything. The only difference now is you don't see the different places where I stopped and started, but it's the exact same audio file. And this is where I can do all of the editing I need to do. So again, Patrick often skips that export, not always. I always do both because I just do not trust myself. So next week, when I begin editing, I'm going to open up that AUP3 and I'll work in there. Now, let's say I'm not done recording. And I'll just do one more quick record, and then we'll talk about recording with multiple people. First, I'm going to make sure I advance to the very end of my file. I'm going to zoom out so y'all can see this a little bit better. I'm going to actually I'm going to click in the trackbed a few seconds after where I ended recording, and I'm going to pick up recording. I think I remember where I left off. Never a failure, always a lesson. Trust the people. If you trust the people, they become trustworthy. Move at the speed of trust. Focus on critical connections more than critical mass. Build the resilience by building the relationships. Less prep, more presence. Less prep, more presence. What you pay attention to grows. And you'll notice the sound levels are a little bit different. I might have been a little further away from my mic, even though I didn't change anything, but it's all right there. Now, if I go to save this, it saves that project file. If I open up that Audacity file one more time, there it is. These are the two recording sessions, and it saved it as audio 1 and audio 2. If I go to open that MP3, oops. Let me try that one more time. I messed up. I'm a little clumsy with my mouse. So here what you're seeing is I've got not quite, maybe like 35 seconds. And here I've got over a minute. And that's because I saved the Audacity project, but I would need to mix it down again to get it into MP3 form. So essentially what I would do is session 1. This is going to be session 2. So it's another version of the recording session. And if I open that up in Audacity, now I've got the full just over a minute. So you can keep recording in your project file, your project workspace, and it will save there. But if you're exporting your audio, you're going to have to keep re-exporting if you want to have those original sound files. All right, really quickly, because we're running low on time, I want to talk a little bit about how to record with other folks. So when we all got sent home in March of 2020, we learned very quickly all the different ways we can record while we're not together. And now that we're coming back together on campus, we're learning better ways of recording in the room together. And there's challenges to both. The best way to record multiple voices is to isolate each voice in a separate track that allows us to edit, to remove, adjust sound levels, remove coughs, things like that. Everybody speaks at a different volume, and it's really hard, even no matter how perfect you get it in the sound check, people might move in the middle of the recording and their voice level, their sound level will change. If you have 4 voices mixed into a single track, it's going to be a lot harder to edit that. Versus if you can isolate all the speakers into individual tracks, it's going to make editing way easier. So what we emphasize is what's called the multi-track. This is the ideal form of a podcast where you have every type of sound isolated from the other. So this is a 6-track multi-track of roughly 2 minutes. The first 3 tracks, reading top to bottom, are people, person 1, person 2, person 3. And then track 4 is the intro music, which, you know, you can, if you want to, you can stack your tracks to be chronological and put that at the very top. Patrick's very good about doing that. I'm a little lazy about that. Track 5, I have some sound effects. And then track 6, I have some background music and some outro music. When we play this, it will play left to right across the timeline, and anything that's stacked on top of each other vertically plays simultaneously. And we'll talk more about this next week, but what this allows me to do is, like, if person 2 is really quiet, I can adjust person 2's volume at the track level rather than having to do it each time they speak if they were mixed in with my track. So I can isolate voices, I can silence things. If you're recording with someone and they're in a noisier environment, you can try to adjust for that without affecting all the other speakers. So that is how we like to do that. Oops. In the early days of the pandemic, we didn't have a lot of good tools for this. We typically relied on Zencastr, which has gotten a lot more robust during the pandemic. And during the early days of the pandemic, they made their features a lot more available for free. It allows you to isolate different speakers into different tracks, and it added a video component in like late 2020 or early 2021 to facilitate more natural conversation. In the last 6 months or last year or so, Zoom has become even easier to use, and it's added features to allow for really good podcasting sound capture. In particular, it now allows you not only to produce a standalone audio file in your recording session, but you can isolate each speaker into a separate audio track. And that's really ideal because then you can do the really good editing that you need to do at the level of each person's voice. We have started emphasizing Zoom and teaching Zoom for multiple simultaneous recording in our institute because most people are already familiar and comfortable with Zoom. So there's one less barrier to overcome. 1 or 2 things to keep in mind. By default, Zoom recordings are what's called an M4A. Not all audio software can open up and read an M4A. Audacity cannot, although I think there's a plugin you can install for that. So you might need to convert your audio file. I use a free online converting tool called Convertio, and I have a demo in the video tutorial folder to show you how to do that. Couple key things to keep in mind with Zoom in the last couple minutes that we have. You can do either a local recording on your computer or a cloud recording. You just have to make sure you've configured things properly, and you want to double check that you've configured everything. So in Zoom, if you go into, oh, hang on, I'm going to have to change. All right, I'm not going to show this in live because I'm using two different screens. Sorry about that. If you go into your web settings for Zoom. So for us at SDSU, you would go to the online Zoom account, sdsu.zoom.us, go into your profile and go into your settings. Under the recording tab, you'll see under cloud recording, it allows you to record a separate audio file of each participant. And you'll want to click that and then hit save. We've had participants think that they had configured their audio, not test it first, and then do a recording, get really good audio, and then realize they didn't have individual audio files produced in that recording session. I've changed my mind. I am really quickly going to share my other screen so you can see this. Sorry, give me one second.
Can I ask a quick question about that recording separate audio files? If you have a lot of people in there, could that create a lot of files?
Yep. And my Zoom account, actually says that it will record up to 200 voices. So here is Zoom. This is my web version. Let me make that a little bigger for y'all. And under my settings, I would go to recording and ask it to record a separate audio file. If I change that, I have to remember to hit save. So remember to hit save. I don't have to resave because I've already done that. Then when I'm done, I can go into my recordings tab. Typically, I get an email. And what we'll see is, here's a good example. This is the audio file of everybody mixed together. And then if I click here, you'll see there were two speakers, my colleague Mark and I. Patrick was actually on, oh no, Patrick, you weren't on this call. Let me do one other one here. This one. So here we have 3 speakers, and each one would be downloadable. Now you can also do this in your local Zoom. Let me go back to screen sharing, and I realize we're just about out of time, so I'll just show that real quick, and then we'll end in the interest of time. You can do this as a local recording as well. In your desktop app, you would go to your settings and do the same thing, and then when the recording is done, it would save it to your Zoom folder, wherever that is on your computer. Again, make sure that you've configured that correctly. Make sure to test it before you do your actual recording so that you know that it's working. And then if you're working in Audacity and you don't have that M4A plugin thing, you're going to have to do a conversion. Doesn't take very long. The free Convertio limits how many files you can convert at a time. I do it in batches of like 2 or 3. It doesn't take very long at all. If Zoom isn't your jam, there are other things you can use. If you're interested in Zencastr, I can show you how to do that one-on-one. But you can also do things like WhatsApp or have folks record to their phones directly. There's any number of ways that you can do it. Okay. That brings us to the end, just at the top of the hour. Next week, we're going to delve into the wonderful world of editing. And as a quick reminder, all of these resources will persist for as long as we support Google Drive here on this campus, and you can catch up on anything you miss. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, but I'll keep the Zoom running for a few more minutes in case folks have any last questions that you want to ask. Thank you for joining us. Yet again, this will go up on YouTube as soon as I can process it. And then next week, again, we will go into editing audio. So have a great weekend, everyone.